Good morning. Welcome to this week's Social Justice Forum. Most everyone here knows that I'm Doug Mitchell, Associate Pastor Emeritus of Faith in Action, now Justice and Mission, which I think is a wonderful job title change. We're building the forums this year around a common theme, moving from understanding to transformation, affecting change together, guided by God. Through these forums, we want to explore capabilities that we need to build the norms that will allow us to examine to effective transformation partners in our community. This morning, we're pleased to welcome Linda Edens. Her husband Ed is here somewhere as well, and Kris Ducett. Kris is the executive director of Bright Stars of Birmingham. That's right. Leading back of Bethlehem, and Linda is the vice chair of the board and is working constantly on trying to encourage travel to the Middle East, which is, of course, difficult right now. But Linda will give us a presentation about the root causes and the current events in the war in Gaza. And then Kris will give us a brief background of Bright Stars. So, somebody else's computer, I'm always nervous. So before we get started, there are a couple of things. For those of you in the room, if you want to ask questions, please raise your hand and wait for one of us to get a mic to you. Otherwise, the people on live stream will not hear anything about what the question is. Those who are on live stream, type your questions into the chat, and they'll be monitored here, and the questions will get asked from here. So as a part of our ongoing effort to promote respectful conversations around difficult topics, we've established guidelines that are on the screen now. If you would look at these, please take a minute to review them and let that guide your questions as we proceed. And if you would wait to the end of the presentation to ask questions. So let us begin with a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, God of justice, breathe into us today a spirit of curiosity and humility. Help us engage with mindfulness, following the lead of voices from our community. Guide our speech and our self-awareness so that we may honor the divine in all people. Amen. Amen. So, Linda?
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. I just want to reiterate that this forum does offer us the opportunity to learn and interact. We want it to inspire us to further God's justice in this world. And there will be the Q&A at the end. Excuse me 1 minute. What I offer you may be new information to many. I ask that you consider it a safe space, as I respect that we all come from differing and varying levels of knowledge, experience, and loyalty on this war. I ask kindly that you offer me the same space to share the facts that I know. I encourage you to be curious rather than contempt. All the slides and information I present come from reputable worldwide organizations. I will share those sources at the end for you. The first time I did this presentation, it was on day 29. It is now day 113. In talking about this war on Gaza, and I even struggle with the word war, I will offer you other definitions throughout this presentation to consider in describing what's happening in Gaza. But for now, we were told that October 7th was when Hamas bombed Israel. In this presentation, I intend to share with you what might be considered root causes, as well as updates on facts. I'll offer you definitions, as I said, to describe the situation, and I ask that you consider the appropriateness of applying such words that I share. So let's talk about root causes. First, the first root cause is the history. And to just do history in snippets, in 1917, in order to win Jewish support for its World War I effort, Lord Balfour of Britain declared its aim was to establish a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Support for this movement grew after World War II and the Holocaust. Then we fast forward to 1947. The United Nations created its partition plan in 1947, and it divided the Palestinian Mandate into two Jewish and Arab states. At that time, the division was 53% of the land went to the Jewish population and 47% remained Palestine. 1948 was the Nakba. It was the expelling of 509 villages. 452 of those were completely eradicated. 750,000 Palestinians at that time were displaced. 200,000 of those went to Gaza. Now let's fast forward again to 1967, and in 1967 was the Six-Day War. Israel war with Palestine and neighboring Arab communities. It resulted in Israel doubling its territory under its control and becoming the preeminent military power of the region. It captured the Sinai, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. In 2005, Israel withdrew its troops from Gaza, but continued its control over that area. So I ask you, is October 7th really the starting date of what's going on right now? Amnesty International came out with this. Over the last several decades, Israel has maintained an institutionalized and prolonged racist oppression of millions of people. It has been condemned over 45 times by the UN Human Rights Council for seizing land, unlawful killings, forceful transfer, and the denial of human rights to self-determination. Some have even questioned the legitimacy of a Palestine, such as Golda Meir. In 1969, then the Prime Minister of Israel, she stated in an article in the New York Times, "There is no Palestinian people." Both Rand McNally and the National Geographic in their Atlas publications from 1947 show Palestine as a country. Also, Mitri Raheb, one of the most respected Palestinian authors and speakers today, states in the book that's on the table right there for your purchase that outside of Canaan, no other label's been given more in the past 2,500 years than Palestine. So let's look at that history in the shrinkage maps. I'm sure many of you have seen these. They're still incredibly relevant. The map on the far left side is 1917, right before the Balfour Declaration, when Lord Balfour declared his aim. The settler colonial framework, the movement for Jewish people to enter Palestine, began at that point. 1946, the second map, that's right before the United Nations came up with their partition plan. You see the sprinkling of white on that map is the emigration of the Jewish people into Palestine. The middle map is the partition plan that the United Nations came up with. The fourth map, 1967, after the Six-Day War. And the last map, even though it says now, this is actually from 2012. So with the ongoing settler development right now, that green has shrunk even more. So let's talk a little bit about definitions. Apartheid state. The implementation of a system of legalized segregation or discrimination in which one group is deprived legal and civil rights. 3 very large organizations and country have came out with that statement. Amnesty International came out with a 280-page report stating that the Israeli authorities are imposing an apartheid system against Palestinians. That was in 2022. The government of South Africa in 2022 called for Israel to be declared an apartheid state. And in 2021, B'Tselem, which is an Israeli organization that documents human rights violations in the occupied territories of Palestine, stated, this is apartheid. The second root cause is the ongoing occupation. This occupation has created the following permanent physical and legal infrastructures. The security wall, which Israel has named as such, claiming it was for security. That was in 2002 that it began being built. The wall is twice as high as the Berlin Wall. It has watchtowers scattered on it with 24-hour manned armed guards. The color of your license plate and the segregated road system, where your license plate dictates where you're allowed to drive. If you have a green license plate, you are allowed to drive on the red roads in Palestine. If you have a yellow plate, you are an Israeli citizen, you can ride on the gold roads. Why that's important is that the color of your license plate determines how long it may take you to get somewhere. One of our associate deans at Dar al Kalima University lives in Ramallah, but works in Bethlehem at the university. It's a 13-mile distance. It takes him an hour and a half each way. In addition to the occupation wall, there are the permanent checkpoints. Right now, 550 in the West Bank, in the form of roadblocks manned by the IDF, earth mounds, turnstiles, and trenches. There is the settlement development, the strategic land seizures, known to the international community as settlements, though I heard a settler speak and refer to it as a neighborhood development. Now keep in mind, Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention states, the occupying power shall not transfer any of its civilization population into the territory it occupies. There are currently 279 settlements in the occupied West Bank. There is arbitrary withholding or limitations on water, electricity, and the internet as well. These are some pictures that I took on some of my travels. That's a settlement on the far right side. The presence of the Israeli Defense Force in the middle, that's in the town of Hebron. And then this checkpoint on your left, you will see a Muslim woman with her 2 children. I just walked through that checkpoint prior to her entering. Instead of a red X at the top, I was allowed a green circle to go through with ease. The minute she came into the cage, that red X came up. The gate was locked, and for the time that I watched, which was between 5 and 10 minutes, she was ignored with her children. The third root cause is the 16-year siege on Gaza. Now, by the word siege, I mean it's being surrounded and cut off from essential supplies, as well as being controlled by another force. The UN in 2012 stated that without remedial action, it would be unlivable, that is Gaza, in 2020. And yet, they survived. Now, what I state here is everything. Hello? There we go. Everything that was existing in Gaza before October 7th. Please keep that in mind. This is not result of the war. 95 Hello? Okay. 95% of the water before October 7 was undrinkable. They received 4 to 8 hours of electricity a day. The seas were controlled. Fishermen, if they went out too far, were shot. The air was controlled. There is no in and out of Gaza without permits issued by Israel. That is for families to visit families, work outside of Gaza, receive health care, or go to church or the mosque. The World Health Organization states that Gazan children pre-October 7 were not receiving enough calorie intake to develop and grow. There was 70% unemployment. The majority of Gazans were under 18, and unscheduled bombings were simply a part of their life. This is a picture of the bombed airport. It was built in 1998. Our President Clinton at the time attended the opening ceremonies with Yasser Arafat. In 2002, it was bombed and is no longer operable. This is a map of Gaza, and right now the only reason I have this up is so that you can see the crossings. 3 crossings, one at the north end, the Erez crossing, which right now, because of the war, is no longer open, and then 2 crossings at the bottom, the Rafah and the Karim Shalom. The Rafah crossing is in Egypt, but Israel still has control over that. This is a picture that shows a little bit more clearly what the border, what the surrounding situation is of Gaza. You will see that there are 2 fences, the one on the left and the one on the right. The fence on the on the right is a smart fence. It is 7 meters high. It has sensors and remote control machine guns that will be activated if people walk into the no-go zone. The no-go zone is the red zone that you see on the Gazan side. It's a 100-meter area. And then an additional restricted area, 100 to 300 meters of farmland, where Gazans are not allowed in there unless they are active farmers and they are walking on foot. There have been peaceful efforts that have been tried. A man by the name of Ahmed Abu Artima organized a series of demonstrations called the Great March of Return. This was in 2018. They were held, the series of demonstrations, if you will, were held every Friday, where Palestinians, Gazans would walk toward the no-go zone. At that time, 214 Gazans were killed, 46 children, and 36,000 injured. The 4th root cause is the United States complicity. $4 billion yearly of your taxpayer money go to the Israeli defense. It funds the bombing, the invasion, the aid blockage, and displacement of Palestinian children and families. The only stipulation on that $4 billion is that the weaponry that is purchased or that is used with that money is purchased from the United States of America. The misinformation or omission of information by our U.S. media is an atrocity in itself. This misinformation is also shared by our president, stating, for instance, that he had seen pictures of beheaded babies when, in fact, he had not. Our media underreports the violence against Palestinians, and by that I mean the home demolitions, the land seizures, the physical attacks, the detainments, the killings, while covering any Palestinian display of force. Our media ignores the power differential between the occupier and the occupied. The United States explicitly supports settlement development. Our representative at the UN Security Council continually halts proposals to implement humanitarian efforts. And Zionism and Christian Zionism are powerful forces in our government. Just to be clear on what I mean by those words, Zionism is the belief of an establishment of a Jewish state. Christian Zionism is an ideology that states that the Jewish people return to the Holy Land in accordance with prophecy as a prerequisite for the coming of Christ. Right now, it's $4 billion a year, but there was a project done to really figure out how much have we given to Israel since 1946. The Congressional Research Service determined $260 billion. This is our UN Security Council member, Linda Thomas Greenfield. On October 18th, there was a vote asking for a resolution for a temporary ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. The vote ended up 12-1. We were the sole veto. On December 8th, Secretary General Antonio Guterres invoked Article 99 of the UN Security Council. It brings the Council together for any matter that threatens the maintenance of international peace and security. The last time this was used was in 1971, but he stated that Gaza warranted it. He stated an impending catastrophe. The vote, our member at the time, it was not Linda Thomas Greenfield, it was Robert Wood sitting in for her, was the sole veto. On December 22nd, the UN Security Council again asked for immediate, urgent humanitarian aid to Gaza. This time, we abstained. This is a picture of John Hagee. If you folks know who he is, he's the founder of CUFI, which is Christians United for Israel. He has partnered with our previous government and did give the opening prayer when our previous president moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Most recently, he was seen stating, "Israel, you are not alone. God bless the Jewish state." On December 30th, the Biden administration bypassed Congress and approved $147.5 million in arms sale. This was to have gone through Congress. This is a picture from October of 23. Shortly after the war began, our president declared himself a Zionist. Again, remember that means believing in a Jewish state. And the point I'm trying to make is this is not a party thing. This bypasses the party lines. On November 7th, our Congress voted to censor the speech of one of its members. This is Rashida Tlaib. She stated, "From the river to the sea, Palestine should be free." And despite her explanation to Congress that she said that as an aspirational call for freedom, a vote occurred that she be censored. The fifth root cause that I believe in is the extreme right-wing Israeli politics today. The nation-state of the Jewish people law was passed in 2018. That law states the right of self-determination in Israel unique to the Jewish people. It called for Hebrew to be the official language and established Jewish settlement as a national value. Prime Minister Netanyahu has inaugurated a government anchored in Zionistic framework, and in 2019 stated it is the national state, not of all its citizens, but only of the Jewish people. So what about Hamas? Because I know that there's someone in this audience that wants to understand that. Hamas is an ideology. This is all I'll say about this. It does not equate with the 2 million people living within Gaza. It is roughly 1% of the population of Gaza. The U.S. government itself has reported there are 20 to 25,000 Hamas members within Gaza. And if Hamas is the target, why are more than 2/3 of Gazans killed children and women? Why are United Nations sites and Red Crescent sites for emergency shelter being bombed? And lastly, if we can all agree that Hamas's attack should be condemned, and I say this to you that I do believe that. I do not believe in violence. But then we must agree that the subsequent attacks by Israel should also be condemned. And that still leaves us needing to condemn the 75 years of military occupation involving thousands of humanitarian violations. So let's look at Gaza. Gaza's 2.3 million people. You don't have to look at the far right map, but let's look at this one. This is your Minneapolis. And you see the blue outline there? That is Gaza. And that is 2.3 million people in that area. UNICEF states the Gaza Strip is the most dangerous place in the world right now to be a child. This is Gaza pre-October 7, and then that picture was taken on October 8. And this is Gaza today. On October 8th, in a television interview, Benjamin Netanyahu was quoted saying, "We will turn Gaza into an island of ruins." Now, I mentioned the Fourth Geneva Convention earlier. I'd like to explain that a little bit deeper. In 1949, it was adopted and formed as the core international humanitarian law developed to protect civilians during war in areas of armed conflict and occupied territories. Within that Fourth Geneva Convention, attacking healthcare facilities was considered a war crime. Attacking churches is a war crime, and attacking schools is a war crime. Children in areas under siege are ensured under the Fourth Geneva Convention to have access to essential food, clothing, and medicines. The United Nations definition of a crime against humanity, a widespread or systematic attack against a population. The United Nations definition of genocide, any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, racial, ethnic, or religious group, including killing members of that group or causing serious bodily or mental harm to that group. International law prohibits the use of white phosphorus in areas of concentrations of civilians. Yet, white phosphorus was used on Gaza, as reported by Amnesty International on October 31. So, South Africa, to bring them up again, on December 29th, they filed a case with the ICJ, an 85-page report stating the rationale being Israel intends to bring about destruction of a substantial part of the Palestinian group. I'll talk about the ruling that occurred on Friday a little bit later. Euromed is an independent nonprofit for the protection of human rights based out of Geneva. I put this slide up to show you that just in the first week of the war, 25,000 tons of bombs were dropped on Gaza. In all of World War II, Hiroshima, they received 15,000 tons. The death toll as of January 26th, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is where I get my daily updates on killings on both sides and just the goings-on of what's happening. As of yesterday, 26,083 Palestinians have been killed, 64,487 injured. 12,000 plus, and the plus is because there was just a series of killings on some of the soldiers in Gaza, and they didn't have the updated figure, but the majority of that 1,200 occurred on October 7. The Human Rights Watch follows the hostage situation, and right now there are 136 Israelis and foreign nationals being held in Gaza. As of November 1, there are approximately 7,000 Palestinians in the occupied territory being held in detention for alleged security offenses. More have been arrested in the occupied territory since October 7th than has been released. The statistics on Palestinians killed in Gaza does not include those missing in the rubble, of which they are anticipating over 7,000 are under the rubble of the destructed buildings right now, with an estimated 4,900 being women and children. So 12,660 children, 6,860 women, between 60 to 75% of all the fatalities right now in Gaza are in that category. The source of this statistic is the government media office in Gaza. Since October 7, at least 106 children are killed every day. One or both parents of 25,000 children have been killed in Gaza. A little bit about the children killed in Gaza. Again, approximately, well, definitely over 8,000. The children are writing their names now on their arms in case they are killed and go under the rubble in order that they can be identified. On the right is simply something that a Gazan child had done. She wrote her will in anticipation of being killed. And the last line, which is too small for you to read, but it says, "I want to donate my shoes to the poor and the vulnerable," after washing them, of course. 23 hospitals, 53 healthcare centers, and 122 ambulances have been bombed. The slide on the right talks about the Al Ali Arab Hospital that was bombed on October 17th. It was controversial because they were called on the fact that they shouldn't have been bombing hospitals, and they said that the Hamas was hiding out there. They took credit for the bombing on October 7th over social media with that posting that you see. And then on the next day, they deleted it, realizing that that was not a wise thing to do. And they stated, "We did not bomb that hospital. We do not bomb hospitals." As of November 17th, according to the World Health Organization, 23 of the 36 hospitals were not functioning. Right now, there are very limited hospital and medical resources available. 378 of the educational facilities have been bombed as of yesterday, and 100% of all the Gazan students are now without access to any education. Also, to make a point that 29 of those schools were United Nations schools. This is a picture of one of the United Nations schools, the UNRWA school in Bet Hanun in northern Gaza, being blown up on December 12th. 157 mosques as of today have been bombed. When I started this presentation on November 7th, I reported 54 mosques bombed. On November 19th, I reported 77. On January 8th, I reported 122. And today, I report 157 to you all. 3 Christian churches in total have been bombed and damaged: Greek Orthodox, Baptist, and Catholic. One of the oldest Christian churches in the world was bombed, St. Porphyrius. 40 Christians were killed. 119 journalists have been killed. And then, if you're not being killed by bombing, you have the looming possibility of dying because of food insecurity. This source comes from the Infection and Prevention Control of the World Health Organization. 90% of Gazan children are getting 1 to 2 food groups. And 939,000 people are at emergency levels of starvation. In addition to the food crisis, there is the disease crisis. Gaza is seeing a surge in gastrointestinal situations such as diarrhea. There are upper respiratory infections because of all of the smoke. There are cases of meningitis, hepatitis, rashes, scabies, without medical facilities adequate to attend to these folks. On December 23, the head of the World Health Organization called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. On January 5th, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs said this war must end. Here's a map of Gaza just to give you an idea, the north versus the south, because at some point there was where the north was told by Israel, as per droppings of pamphlets from the air saying evacuate south. That's the north in red. And they then went down to Khan Yunis and even closer where the triangles are to the region called Rafah. It's a 25 by 6 mile area. 1.9 million have now fled as the ground forces rolled in to the north. On December 6th, just days after Gazans were directed to evacuate to South Gaza, this is a neighborhood in Rafah, which is the very south, that was bombed, exactly where the Palestinians were told to evacuate for safety. This is Israeli Minister Avi Dichter. And in May, at the Knesset General Assembly, he was quoted saying, "We're rolling out Nakba 2023. Now again, that was in May. And now there has been a situation where refugees have been made to be refugees again. This picture on the left is from the Nakba in 1948, and the picture on the right is one of the corridors from the northern Gaza to South Gaza, where the Palestinians were told to walk. Humanitarian support: 154 UN staff have been killed. In regards to the aid, before October 7th, Gaza received 500 trucks of humanitarian aid from the World Health Organization every day. And now you can see that on this little graph, starting October and then at the end of January, it's all over the place, but most recently, aid's being blocked again. On January 25th and 26th, Friday and Saturday, Israeli protesters blocked the aid trucks at the Karim Shalom crossing. That's one of the ones at the bottom. And the trucks have not been able to enter. Since October 11th, Gaza has been under electricity blackout, and since the 27th, they lost contact in terms of telecommunications and internet. There are some satellite options where people are getting sketchy internet, but I think Kris Ducett and I can say that our communications with our Gazan friends has been very scant. These are the sources that I like to use and I encourage you to use. I just added to this slide, for those of you who have seen this presentation before, the last entry, taxpayersforpeace.org. It's a very friendly website, meaning usable and non-technical, if you will, that gives you a lot of amazing information on exactly where your money is going. This is personal for me. These are some of the people that I know that are within Gaza. This is one of our Dar al Kalima graduates who has since emigrated out of Gaza pre-war, but has all his siblings and nieces and nephews still in Gaza. This is our the program director for the Dar al Kalima campus, which has now been leveled, by the way. She took the position to be the director of the campus, and she moved voluntarily her family to Gaza in the summer. Got a chance to meet her. This picture was taken 2 days before October 7th. We were in Bethlehem to meet her. She went home, and right now we haven't heard from her in quite some time. That is a picture of Ahmed Abu Artima, who organized the Great March of Return. I had the absolute privilege to meet him in Chicago. And this is another one of our Dar al Kalima volunteers who spent time entertaining the children at the hospitals. And that picture up there with him on with the hat was hours before one of the hospitals was bombed and he was killed. So with knowledge comes responsibility. And now comes the good news. Minneapolis, this week, becomes the largest city to pass ceasefire resolution, causing for an end to U.S. funding. It is cities like yours that will create a momentum and a movement so that our government can actually make the right decisions. This is the ruling of South Africa's request at the ICJ. Though they did not call for a ceasefire, which is what I personally wish they would have done, they did state Israel must comply, ordering that they do all in its power to prevent genocide against Palestinians. This is the International Court of Justice. This is a big statement. That's my email if anybody is interested. I'm not going to get into the West Bank, so Doug, I'll call you back up if you want to discuss what's coming next.
Let me just add for us Presbyterians, to the list of sources, there is an Office for Public Witness at the General Assembly. And you can go to the PCUSA website and go to the Office of Public Witness. They have a lot of material about Palestine in general and Gaza in particular. So that's an in-house source. Why don't we go to questions now, and I'll do the next week after that. So if people will wait, raise your hand and wait for a mic to get there, and we'll do the Q&A.
Thank you. Good morning.
I was going to just call her up.
I've been to Bethlehem and Nablus. I've been to the Balata women, the oldest refugee camp in the world, the Balata refugee camp. It hurts my heart to hear all of this. I follow it daily, though. I know about most of it. My question is, have you taken it to the White House? Have you taken your presentation to the White House?
I have not taken my presentation to the White House. However, I'm connected with an amazing group of folks from Chicago. It's called the Chicago Faith Coalition. And our main purpose is advocacy. with the hopes of changing legislation. And we are pounding our Congress regularly. In addition to that, Mitri Raheb just spent some time in D.C. when he came to the States a few weeks ago, and he was doing the hard work, lobbying as a Palestinian for the right decisions to be made.
And-
But I believe that, I've told Doug this, that I'll speak to anyone and everyone that will hear me, because it's important to know the truth, and it's important to have people understand what's really driving this, especially as the war goes on. The news is less and less, as we are, in the United States. Oh, that's an old story. What's new now? So I don't want this to be something that's skirted under the bed.
And for us Westminster folks, Dar al Kalima, the University of Arts and Culture, where Mitri Raheb is the founder and president, is one of our formal global partners. So in Bethlehem, both Christmas Lutheran Church and Dar al Kalima are under covenant partnership with us, and so we follow closely, primarily through Mitri, what is happening there. And Linda and I and Ed were both at a conference at Dar al Kalima. I left on October 5th. I think you left on the 6th. We didn't know that this was 2 days and 1 day before all this would begin. There was a shift on October 7th. It didn't start then, but there was a clear shift at that point. And so, trying to follow Mitri, and he has been doing statements through social media, and has been doing live streaming to try to keep us up to date, those of us involved in Bright Stars. And it's heartbreaking to hear him struggle to tell us, particularly what's happening in Gaza, because there is an educational center of Dar al Kalima in Gaza. And one of the things that they're very proud of is that there are volunteers who have been trained to do art therapy with children, and they are still doing that to the extent they can in UN refugee and shelter centers. At least 2 of those volunteers have been killed since the beginning of the war.
Hey, Doug, Pastor Alana asked if Kris could step up for a few minutes and just give a Bright Stars overview before the live stream cancels.
All right, good.
Good morning, friends.
Right into the
Okay, good morning, friends. This way? Okay. Good morning, friends. If you're anything like me right now after that thorough presentation, your heart hurts, right? And so you're asking yourself, where's the hope and what can I do? And I am here to tell you that there is hope. And if you are a part of this congregation, you are a part of hope, because this congregation has a partnership with Bright Stars of Bethlehem. And our mission at Bright Stars of Bethlehem is to raise awareness and support for Dar al Kalima University, the first and only university of arts and culture in all of Palestine. We say only because we had a center in Gaza up until recently. I want to say I have 4 young adult children, Hannah, Summer, Danny, and Halela, 29, 27, 25, and 18. Raise your hand if you have any young adult in your life. Okay. So our young adults in our lives, they're the next generation of leaders in the United States, right? Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb had the vision to empower the next generation of creative leaders in Palestine. That's where the hope is, friends. And what's happening at Dar al Kalima University is life-changing and hopeful and beautiful. I have done countless interviews and have countless new friends that are these young adults that are, the Palestinians to me are the most resilient, hopeful people in the world against all odds, against this horrible genocide. So these young adults, there are still 550 young adults that are getting an education in Palestine, in Bethlehem, and they're doing their education virtually right now. It's difficult, but they're pushing through, and these are the people that are going to be the next generation of leaders. This is the hope, and this is what we do at Bright Stars. So again, I'm here to thank you for what you do in your partnership with Bright Stars, because you ask yourself, where's the hope? What can I do? You're doing something already. You're world changers as well. So thank you.
One last business piece before we get to more questions. Next week, we'll hear from Nathan Stock, who is a long-term employee of the Carter Center and has had a long-time working relationship in Gaza. And he will talk about the 20th century history of Gaza and the occupation and his reflections on the current status. I know Nathan, he's very, very sharp, and so I would encourage you to be here for that. So, any other questions?
Linda, could you give an update on how courses and curriculum and students and faculty are being affected on the Bethlehem campus?
Sure. Kris, why don't you take charge of that one?
So in Bethlehem, the Israelis have canceled 250,000 work permits for Palestinians to go into Israel. So also tourism. Tourism is 70% of the economy in Bethlehem, right? So I have one student, young lady, who has recently told me that she's struggling because her dad used to work in Israel. Her mom ran a souvenir shop. So that's how our students are being affected very much financially, because a lot of the parents have no work at this time.
Yes.
Thank you. You say that Hamas is an ideology. Can you explain what you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? You know what? I don't want to get into politics today. There's a lot of history with Hamas, and it is part of the Palestinian history and the Israeli history as well, and the development and how Hamas got into Gaza. I'd rather not touch on that, if that's okay with you, Doug.
Yeah, that's hard to do quickly. So, okay. If you didn't hear, Nathan will address some of this next week as well. So thank you, Linda, very much. And Kris, thank you for being here. Enjoy injustice. Go forth.